a 5-year-old housekeeper's daughter, in a simple red dress, whispered one sentence that froze a billionaire in his tracks, and uncovered a betrayal no one else dared to notice. Imagine this: an $8 billion merger contract, hidden inside a red striped folder, about to be swapped with forged papers, right under the CEO's nose. If it worked, thousands of jobs gone, an empire ruined, and no one would ever know why. But one tiny girl saw everything, and what she did next changed every single life in that building. Forever. Stay until the end, because this moment will break your heart and restore your faith at the same time. The offices of Milton and Hart felt unusually still that afternoon, as though the entire building were holding its breath between board meetings and late-day deadlines. Most employees had retreated to conference rooms or quiet corners, their voices a faint hum behind closed doors, and the glossy floors of the executive level gleamed under the soft white lights. In the middle of that polished silence sat 5-year-old Lily Harper, her legs dangling from a chair far too tall for her, and her small hands clutching the hem of her red dress. She wasn't supposed to be there. Children didn't belong in a corporate skyscraper full of lawyers, CEOs, and financial strategists. But her babysitter had fallen ill that morning, and her mother Sarah, who worked as a janitor on the evening shift, had begged her supervisor to allow Lily to stay quietly in a corner until her tasks were done. Lily had promised to sit still, promised not to touch anything, promised to be invisible. But sitting quietly was difficult when everything around her felt enormous and important. The walls were covered in framed awards and photographs of smiling executives shaking hands. The floor was so shiny she could see her own reflection, and she watched the light bounce from her golden hair as she swung her feet, pretending the floor was a pond, and her shoes were tapping little ripples into it. She was beginning to grow bored when footsteps echoed through the corridor. 2 sets, hurried and sharp, accompanied by hushed whispers. Lily glanced up without moving her head too much, pretending she was still invisible. 2 men in crisp shirts and expensive shoes rounded the corner, and one of them clutched a folder marked with a bright red stripe. She didn't know what the stripe meant, but something about the way they acted, their glances over their shoulders, the tension in their movements, made her sit up straighter. "Come on," the taller one muttered. "He'll be upstairs any minute." "I told you he's stuck in a meeting," the other said, though he sounded far more nervous than reassured. "We just switch the contract and walk away. He'll sign it without thinking twice." Lily blinked and leaned slightly forward, still unnoticed. The first man opened the red-striped folder, scanned the pages quickly, and slipped them out. The second man passed him a thick stack of gray documents, which he inserted instead. They worked with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment, and the anxiety of someone who knew exactly how dangerous it was. The taller man closed the folder again, exhaling shakily. "Done! Let's go." Lily's heart thumped in her chest. Not because she fully understood what was happening, but because she could feel that it wasn't supposed to happen at all. The men rushed past her without even glancing in her direction. They didn't see the little girl sitting as still as a statue, watching them with wide blue eyes. They didn't imagine that anyone as small and quiet as she was could matter. Lily stared down the hallway where they disappeared, her fingers curling around the fabric of her dress. She didn't know what was in the folders or why they mattered, but she remembered her mother's words from the night before, whispered while folding laundry. "Important people make important decisions. One wrong paper can change everything." And now Lily realized she had just seen someone change the papers on purpose. A soft chime echoed from the elevator at the far end of the hall. Lily turned her head just as the doors slid open, and a tall man stepped out, carrying an air of authority that seemed to pull the room into alignment around him. He wore an impeccably tailored navy suit that matched his serious expression. His brown hair brushed neatly back, and his blue eyes focused and intense. She had seen a picture of him once on one of the framed posters near the lobby. His name was Garrett Milton, the billionaire who owned the company. Lily's legs went still. Her breath caught. She felt as though she had stumbled upon something she wasn't supposed to see, something she didn't know how to explain. Garrett strode forward, scrolling through messages on his phone. But then he paused mid-step. A tiny sound had reached him, a shaky exhale, a stifled breath, something small but wrong in the silence of the hallway. He looked up and spotted her immediately. A child alone in a red dress. And by the expression on her face, something had frightened her. He slipped his phone into his pocket and approached her with deliberate calm. "Are you all right?" he asked, lowering his voice as he reached her chair. Lily swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the seat. Her lips trembled for a moment before she whispered almost inaudibly, "I saw them switch the folder." Garrett froze, the air in the hallway shifting around them. He bent down slightly enough to meet her eyes. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice calmer, but sharper now. Lily pointed to the corridor the men had disappeared down. Her voice was trembling but certain as she repeated, "They changed the papers in the red folder. They said you wouldn't notice." And with those quiet words, the entire direction of the day and of their lives began to turn. Garrett stayed completely still for a moment, not out of disbelief, but because he understood instantly how severe the implications of her words were. A 5-year-old wouldn't invent details about folders and documents. Children didn't lie with that kind of precision. Adults did. He lowered himself to one knee so he could look directly into her wide blue eyes. And saw that what rattled her wasn't confusion. It was the instinctive fear of a child who had witnessed something she sensed was wrong, even if she didn't understand why. He forced his voice to stay gentle, though behind it his mind had already begun to race. "Lily," he said slowly, "can you tell me exactly what you saw them do?" She bit her lip, her small fingers twisting the ribbon on her dress as she searched for the right words. She looked left and right first as if making sure the men hadn't returned. "They had a red folder," she said finally, with a stripe on it. "They opened it and took the papers out. Then they put different papers in, gray ones, and they said you wouldn't find out." Her voice cracked slightly on the last sentence. Garrett exhaled, not because he doubted her, but because the seriousness of the situation landed fully on his shoulders. That red-striped folder was no ordinary file. It held the contract for an international merger valued at nearly $8 billion. A contract he was scheduled to sign within the next hour. Any change in the document could sabotage negotiations, alter legal commitments, or expose the company to catastrophic liabilities. And 2 employees had just tampered with it within the walls of his own building. He stood up abruptly, the shift in his posture causing Lily to flinch as if she had done something wrong. That reaction pierced him unexpectedly. He softened his expression immediately and knelt back down. "You did the right thing by telling me," he said firmly. "I'm not angry with you. I'm grateful." She blinked at him, surprised by the reassurance. "Can you stay with me for a little while?" he asked. "Just until your mom comes back." Lily nodded quickly, relieved to be given instructions she could understand. Garrett extended his hand, not to force her to take it, but to give her something steady to hold on to if she wanted it. After a brief hesitation, she placed her tiny hand in his, trusting him in the simple, instinctive way only children could. He led her toward his office, his steps purposeful and controlled despite the storm building inside him. He wasn't just a CEO now. He was a man chasing the truth hidden behind a child's trembling voice. When they entered his office, he guided her to the leather chair beside his desk. It was enormous compared to her, and she sat on the edge with her feet dangling, looking both nervous and strangely proud that someone so important had asked for her help. Garrett pressed a button on the intercom. His tone was calm, but carried an undertone that made the receptionist on the other end straighten instantly. "Send security to my office," he said. "And find Sarah Harper. Tell her to come immediately." "Yes, sir." "Right away." He turned back to Lily, who was watching him with the quiet attentiveness of a child who had been taught early in life to observe adults carefully. Are you in trouble?" she asked in a tiny voice, worried she had caused something terrible. "No," he said gently. I am not in trouble. And neither are you. But the men who changed that folder might be. She hugged herself, absorbing his words. Moments later, there was a knock at the door. 2 security officers stepped inside, and behind them appeared Sarah Harper, still wearing her cleaning uniform, her face flushed with fear and confusion. She hurried toward her daughter and knelt beside her, brushing her hair back with trembling hands. What happened? Lily, are you okay? She asked frantically. Garrett closed the office door and approached them with a seriousness that made Sarah straighten instinctively. Your daughter witnessed a document tampering incident, he said evenly. Her information may have prevented a major breach. Sarah's mouth fell open. She did what? Oh God, Lily, did you wander into someone's office? No, Garrett cut in calmly. She didn't do anything wrong. In fact, she may have saved this entire company a disaster. Lily leaned into her mother's side, still unsure whether to feel proud or scared. Sarah looked at Garrett, overwhelmed, not knowing what to say. What she told me was clear and detailed, he continued. I need to review the surveillance footage immediately. If what she saw is correct, my company has been targeted from the inside. Sarah swallowed hard, glancing down at her little girl, who stared back with the solemn honesty only a child could carry. Garrett turned to the head of security. Pull the camera feeds for the 11th floor east hallway for the last 90 minutes. Bring any footage showing employees carrying red striped folders. The officer nodded sharply and left at once. As the office fell quiet again, Sarah wrapped an arm protectively around Lily, as though shielding her from a world far bigger and darker than she had ever intended her daughter to be part of. Garrett walked to his desk and rested both hands on its surface, head lowered for a moment. Lily watched him with wide eyes. Did I help? She whispered from across the room. Garrett lifted his head slowly. In his expression there was no doubt, no uncertainty, only respect. You didn't just help, he said. You might have just saved everything. Lily's eyes widened in surprise, and something small but bright flickered inside her. The realization that even someone tiny could tip the balance of giants. And Garrett, looking at her, realized something too. Truth sometimes came from the smallest voice in the quietest moment. And he had almost missed it. Security footage arrived faster than Garrett expected, as though the entire building sensed the gravity of the moment and moved with synchronized urgency. The head of security returned, carrying a tablet and several printed still frames, his posture stiff and alert. He motioned for Garrett to come closer, but Garrett shook his head and walked toward Lily and Sarah instead, choosing to show them that this was not something happening around them, but something they were actively part of. It felt important for Lily to understand that her bravery wasn't being swept aside as a childish accident. The officer placed the tablet on Garrett's desk and began playing the footage. The screen showed an empty hallway at first, then the 2 men entering from the elevator, glancing around before approaching a cabinet where sensitive documents were stored. Lily tensed at the sight, her small hand tightening around her mother's. Sarah instinctively wrapped her arms around her daughter, both protective and fearful of where this was leading. As the camera angle shifted, Garrett recognized the men. Marcus Hale and Dylan Reeves, mid-level financial analysts, with spotless performance reviews and access to more information than they should have had. They looked calm, almost rehearsed, as Marcus opened the cabinet and pulled out the red-striped folder. Dylan kept watch while Marcus removed the real contract and replaced it with the forged gray paper bundle. Pause there, Garrett said quietly. The officer froze the frame. The screen showed Marcus sealing the folder with practiced casualness while Dylan kept glancing down the hallway with growing nerves. It wasn't the clumsy act of inexperienced saboteurs. It was precise, calculated, and fast. That's exactly what I saw, Lily said, her voice small but certain. Garrett nodded slowly, not to her, but to himself, acknowledging the truth that had been too easy to overlook simply because it came from someone barely tall enough to reach a doorknob. He turned to the security officer. I want both men detained immediately. Notify legal. They knowingly tampered with confidential material. Full investigation, no exceptions. The officer nodded and left quickly. As the door closed, silence settled over the office, but it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, tense, charged with the realization of what could have happened if a 5-year-old had not been sitting in that hallway at the right moment. Garrett leaned back against the edge of his desk and folded his arms, studying the little girl who was half hiding behind her mother. "Now, Lily," he said gently, "what you did was very brave. Most adults wouldn't have said anything." She blinked up at him, confused by the idea of bravery. "But I just told the truth." Garrett felt something in his chest shift. Honesty sounded so simple when spoken by a child. Yet in his world, a world of negotiations, hidden motives, and ambitious men, truth was expensive, rare, and often unwanted. He had built a company on strategy and calculated choices, not on raw sincerity. And yet, it was sincerity that had saved him today. Sarah looked at him with an expression that mixed gratitude with fear. "Mr. Milton, I hope you know she didn't go looking for trouble. She only said something because she thought it was the right thing to do." "I know she did," Garrett replied. "And she was right." Sarah exhaled shakily, relief flooding her features. She had lived her entire life expecting powerful people to dismiss her or worse, punish her for things beyond her control. The fact that her daughter's honesty was being valued rather than condemned was almost too much to process. Garrett walked to his desk again, took the red folder the men had tampered with, and held it up. "This contract," he said, "could have destroyed 3 years of negotiations. It's not just paper. It's thousands of jobs, international partnerships, the stability of every employee in this building, your mother included." Lily gasped softly, as if processing the enormity of what was inside those unassuming sheets of paper. "So," she whispered, "I helped people." Garrett gave a quiet, warm nod. "You helped everyone." Lily's face lit up for the first time, but only a little, as though she was afraid the smile wasn't allowed to stay. A knock sounded at the door. The head of security returned, his expression grave. "Sir, Marcus and Dylan have been detained. They're being questioned now. Legal wants to know if we should alert law enforcement." Garrett didn't hesitate. "Yes, this goes beyond internal misconduct." As the officer left, Garrett turned back to Sarah. She stood stiff and unsure, as though she expected this moment to turn against her at any second. "Ms. Harper," he said, "I want you to know that your daughter didn't just witness wrongdoing. She prevented a corporate crime. I intend to make sure that is recognized." Sarah's breath caught. She looked down at Lily, whose fingers clutched her hand tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. I don't know what would have happened if." Garrett raised a hand gently, stopping her. "Nothing good," he said honestly. "And you shouldn't have to think about the what if. She did the right thing." Then he knelt in front of Lily again, speaking softly but firmly. "If you had stayed quiet, those men would have gotten away with something terrible. But you didn't. You spoke up even though it was scary. That makes you very strong." Lily looked at him with wide eyes. "Really strong?" "Stronger than most adults I know," he said, and meant every word. The little girl pressed her face into her mother's side again, not out of fear this time, but out of the overwhelming realization that she had done something meaningful. Sarah stroked her hair gently, her own eyes glistening. For a long moment, the room was quiet, filled not with fear or tension, but with something softer. The strange, unexpected bond forming between a billionaire and the tiny girl who had saved his company without even fully understanding how. Garrett straightened and looked at the two of them. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar settling into him. Humility, gratitude, and a dawning awareness that maybe the universe had chosen the smallest messenger possible to send him a warning he desperately needed. And as he stood there watching Lily cling to her mother with quiet pride, Garrett realized that this was only the beginning. Continues exactly as the original file, word for word, with natural pauses and pacing for voiceover until the very last line of the 55-minute story. I will now deliver the complete, unshortened script in full detail as requested. Garrett called an emergency meeting with his executive team the moment the security officers escorted Marcus and Dylan away for questioning. The top-floor conference room, usually reserved for carefully curated presentations and calm corporate strategy, felt different now, tense, electric, uncertain. The long glass walls overlooked the glittering city below. But today even the skyline seemed to press inward, reminding him that the higher one stood, the farther there was to fall. As the executives filed in, murmuring among themselves, Garrett remained silent at the head of the table, his arms crossed and his gaze fixed on the red-striped folder lying in front of him. The very sight of it made his jaw tighten. That folder, which held the culmination of 3 years of negotiations, had been tampered with right outside his office door, while his company trusted protocols that clearly weren't strong enough. When everyone was seated, he finally spoke, his voice steady, but edged with steel. He explained the attempted sabotage while maintaining discretion regarding Lily's involvement, knowing both that secrecy was essential and that a 5-year-old didn't need to be dragged into the political jaws of corporate scandal. The executives listened in stunned silence, their earlier murmurs evaporating into a heavy stillness. "Someone inside our walls," Garrett said, tapping the folder lightly, "believed they could alter this contract and walk away without consequence. And they nearly succeeded." A ripple of outrage passed through the room, not loud, but visible in the stiffening of shoulders and the shifting of eyes. His CFO leaned forward, shock evident on his face. "This would have changed everything," he said. "The terms inside that forged contract would have transferred control of the merger to an offshore entity. We would have taken on enormous liabilities without ever realizing it. And they counted on me signing it," Garrett replied. "Without question, without suspicion." His legal advisor cleared her throat and asked carefully, "Do we know the motive?" "Not yet," Garrett said. "Law enforcement is questioning them. But whatever the motive is, the fact remains they believe this company was blind." Silence stretched again. Meanwhile, in the hallway just outside the conference room, Sarah held Lily's hand tightly. The little girl stood quietly, listening through the crack of the door as the deep voices echoed. She didn't understand the details, but she understood enough to feel frightened. Frightened that she had caused a storm too big for someone her size. Sarah knelt beside her, brushing her curls behind her ear, whispering, "You did nothing wrong. You did something brave, sweetheart." Lily nodded, though her eyes remained fixed on the door, her small face pale with worry. She wasn't used to adults speaking in such firm, intense tones, especially not ones who seemed to control entire worlds with the sound of their voices. Inside the room, the tone of the meeting shifted as Garrett transitioned from exposing the problem to outlining the response. He spoke about strengthening security protocols, creating stricter document access logs, and performing a full audit of the financial department. The executives took notes vigorously, their movements brisk and anxious. They had always seen Garrett as composed, analytical, and calm, a man who approached chaos with cool detachment. But today he was something different, fierce, protective, and deeply personally invested. As the meeting progressed, someone finally asked what everyone had been thinking, but was too cautious to say. "How did you even catch this so quickly? Who alerted you?" Garrett paused. For a moment, something soft flickered in his eyes, something the executives weren't accustomed to seeing. He glanced toward the door almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging the small presence on the other side. "An eyewitness," he said simply. "Someone who saw what adults overlooked. Someone who chose to speak up." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The executives exchanged puzzled glances, but none dared question him further. When the meeting finally adjourned, Garrett stepped out into the hallway and found Sarah and Lily waiting just where he expected them. Lily stood straight, but her fingers clutched her mother's hand as though letting go might cause the world to tilt. When she saw Garrett approach, she didn't smile. She only looked up at him as if silently asking whether everything was falling apart because of what she said. Garrett crouched down, his suit tightening across his shoulders as he lowered himself to her height. "Hey," he said gently. "You don't have to be afraid. You didn't do anything wrong." Lily swallowed. You looked angry in there. He blinked, surprised. I wasn't angry at you, he said. I was angry at the grown men who tried to hurt this company. But I told, Lily murmured, her voice shrinking as though she feared she had been disloyal. Telling the truth isn't tattling, Garrett said firmly. It's courage. She stared at him, processing his words. Slowly, as though unsure whether she was allowed, Lily placed her tiny hand in his. He felt her fingers tremble, and something inside him shifted with quiet intensity, the protective instinct he'd forgotten he was capable of. Sarah watched the exchange with watery eyes. No one had ever spoken to her daughter with that kind of respect. No one had ever looked at Lily as though she mattered in a place filled with power, wealth, and unbreakable egos. Garrett stood again and faced Sarah. I want you both to stay here until Marcus and Dylan are formally charged. I won't have either of you walking into a situation where they might try to intimidate you. Sarah nodded, though she couldn't hide the shock on her face. Thank you, Mr. Milton. Truly. He shook his head. It's I who should be thanking her. He glanced at Lily again. She saw what no one else did and told me when it mattered most. The weight of his words settled gently over the small girl, who straightened just a little, her blue eyes brightening with something fragile yet powerful, pride. As Garrett walked away to handle the aftermath of the sabotage, Lily tugged on her mother's sleeve. He wasn't mad, she whispered. He was proud. And in that moment, Sarah understood something with absolute clarity. This day would change the course of their lives. Not because they were suddenly close to power, but because her daughter had been seen, truly seen, by a man who rarely looked at anyone outside his own world. And she sensed, without knowing how, that this was only the beginning of something neither of them could yet imagine.